Did Nate Tibbetts just confess to the biggest tampering scandal in WNBA history on camera? When the Phoenix Mercury head coach casually dropped a bombshell about orchestrating Dana Bonner's return over multiple seasons, even mentioning Alyssa Thomas as a key player in making it happen, the entire league stopped in its tracks. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a blueprint for how to finesse the system, and the Indiana Fever were left holding the bag. What you're about to hear goes deeper than anyone imagined, and by the end of this, you'll understand why fans are demanding a full investigation. Before we dive into the evidence that has the WNBA scrambling for damage control, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling us whether you think Phoenix should face penalties for this. Your engagement keeps us bringing you the truth that mainstream media won't touch. Let's rewind to where this mess started. Back in the 2024 offseason, the Indiana Fever thought they'd pulled off a masterstroke. Dana Bonner, a two-time WNBA champion with championship pedigree and veteran savvy, was supposed to be the missing piece for a young roster centered around Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston. The narrative was perfect on paper. Clark, the generational talent from Iowa who'd taken the league by storm despite dealing with injuries in early 2025, needed a steady hand to guide her through the physical grind of professional basketball. Boston, the dominant force in the paint, could benefit from Bonner's championship experience. The Fever's front office sold this signing as the bridge between potential and championship contention. Indiana fans bought into the vision completely. Local media praised the move. National analysts called it smart roster construction. Bonner herself gave all the right soundbites about mentorship, about wanting to help develop young talent, about being excited for the challenge. She talked about Caitlin Clark's incredible court vision and how she could learn from playing alongside such a special talent. Everything looked legitimate. The preseason buzz suggested Indiana had finally figured out how to accelerate their rebuild without sacrificing the future. For a franchise that had struggled for years before Clark's arrival transformed their entire trajectory, this felt like the moment everything clicked into place. But that wasn't the whole story, and the cracks started showing almost immediately. 9 games. That's all it took for the entire facade to crumble. Dana Bonner, the veteran mentor who was supposed to anchor Indiana's playoff push, demanded out. Not requested, demanded. The speed of the collapse was stunning even by WNBA standards where player movement happens fast. One week she was talking about building chemistry and leading young players, the next she was reportedly refusing to suit up and making it clear she had no intention of honoring the contract she'd signed just months earlier. The official explanation from the Fever's front office was vague and corporate, mentioning fit issues and mutual agreement to part ways. Bonner's own statement was equally sterile, saying the situation didn't work out and thanking the organization for granting her request to move on. Here's where it gets interesting. Bonner didn't just leave quietly. She disappeared, no heartfelt goodbye post on social media, no video thanking fans who'd welcomed her, no acknowledgement of teammates like Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston who'd publicly expressed excitement about playing with her. For someone who'd been marketed as a leader and mentor, the silence was deafening. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham, who joined the Fever in 2025 and has been nothing but professional and committed to the team, showed everyone what real veteran presence looks like. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Fever fans weren't buying the official narrative for a second. Social media exploded with accusations of a setup. People started connecting dots that the front office either missed or ignored. Why would a veteran sign a contract only to bail after 9 games? Why was there zero effort to make it work? Why did she seem so distant, even during those brief games she played? The conspiracy theories started flying. But here's the thing about conspiracy theories. Sometimes they turn out to be conspiracy facts. What happened next would shock everyone, even the most cynical observers who thought they'd seen everything in professional sports. Enter Nate Tibbetts and the clip that changed everything. During what appeared to be a casual post-game interaction in 2025, the Phoenix Mercury head coach let his guard down in spectacular fashion. With a grin that suggested he had no idea how damaging his words would be, Tibbetts said, and I'm quoting directly here, "Luckily, the last 2 off-seasons we've tried to get DB to come back to Phoenix. Unfortunately, she didn't pick us twice. 3rd time is a charm. I think AT helped in that a little bit." For those who need translation, DB is Dana Bonner and AT is Alyssa Thomas, Bonner's fiancé and a star player in her own right. Let that sink in for a moment. The head coach of the Phoenix Mercury just admitted on camera that they'd been pursuing Dana Bonner for 2 full off-seasons before she finally joined them. That means while she was under contract with Connecticut, Phoenix was making contact. That means while she was signing with Indiana, Phoenix was still in her ear. That means the entire Indiana stint might have been nothing more than a layover on her way back to Phoenix, a way to secure a bigger contract that Phoenix couldn't initially offer before engineering her exit and joining the Mercury for less money. The WNBA's collective bargaining agreement is crystal clear on this. Unauthorized contact with players under contract to other teams is tampering, period. There's no gray area. There's no interpretation needed. When Tibbetts casually mentioned trying to recruit Bonner during off-seasons when she was contractually obligated to other franchises, he wasn't just breaking protocol. He was confessing to violations that should trigger league investigation and penalties. The fact that he said it so casually, with such obvious pride in finally landing his target, makes it even worse. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was a man who genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong. But the Alyssa Thomas angle adds another layer that makes this situation exponentially more complicated and potentially more damning. When Tibbetts said Aid helped in that a little bit, he opened a door that the league definitely doesn't want opened. Alyssa Thomas is one of the premier players in the WNBA, a consistent all-star and someone whose opinion carries weight. She's also Dana Bonner's fiancée, which means their personal and professional lives are deeply intertwined. Now, there's nothing wrong with partners supporting each other's career decisions. That's normal and healthy. But when a coach specifically credits a player on another team with helping recruit someone, you're no longer talking about personal support. You're talking about potential tampering through a third party. Here's why this matters so much. If Alyssa Thomas was communicating with Phoenix about bringing Dana Bonner to the Mercury while Bonner was still under contract elsewhere, that's a massive problem. If Thomas was acting as a go-between or providing assurances that Bonner would eventually force her way to Phoenix, that potentially violates multiple league rules about player tampering. The WNBA has strict guidelines about this specifically to prevent situations where players can orchestrate moves through back channels while their current teams are left in the dark. The fact that Tibbetts publicly acknowledged Thomas's role, even in passing, suggests there was coordination happening behind the scenes that absolutely should not have been taking place. And let's talk about what this did to the Indiana Fever, because they're the real victims in this entire mess. Indiana committed significant resources to signing Dana Bonner. They sold their fan base on a vision of mentorship and veteran leadership. They built marketing campaigns around the idea of championship experience guiding generational talent. Caitlin Clark, who's been dealing with injuries in early 2025 and could have genuinely benefited from a committed veteran presence, was left without the mentor she was promised. Aliyah Boston, who's continued to dominate in the paint and establish herself as one of the league's premier young players, lost a teammate who was supposed to help take her game to the next level. The entire roster had to deal with the distraction and disruption of a veteran essentially quitting on them after 9 games. But beyond the on-court impact, there's the financial and competitive damage. The Fever used cap space and roster flexibility to sign Bonner, space they could have used on players who actually wanted to be there. They passed on other veteran options because they thought they'd secured their missing piece. When Bonner bailed after 9 games, Indiana was left scrambling mid-season to fill a hole that shouldn't have existed. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham, who joined the Fever in 2025, has shown what real commitment looks like, playing through adversity and actually mentoring younger players the way Bonner was supposed to. The contrast between someone who honors their commitment and someone who allegedly used a team as a stepping stone couldn't be clearer. The competitive implications are huge too. In a league where every game matters and playoff seeding can come down to tiebreakers, losing 9 games with a player who wasn't fully committed could be the difference between making the playoffs and missing out. The Fever had to adjust their entire system and rotation on the fly, dealing with chemistry issues and trust problems that ripple through a locker room when a veteran quits on the team, all while Phoenix was allegedly waiting in the wings, knowing they'd eventually get their target regardless of the damage left behind. So, where does this leave us now, and what should happen next? Because this isn't just about one shady transaction. This is about the integrity of the entire league. The WNBA has remained conspicuously silent on this situation, despite mounting pressure from fans, media, and even some people within organizations who are quietly furious about what appears to be blatant tampering going unpunished. The league's tampering rules exist for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of orchestrated player movement that undermines competitive balance and screws over teams that operate in good faith. If Phoenix contacted or recruited Dana Bonner while she was under contract to Connecticut or Indiana, that's a violation. If Alyssa Thomas acted as an intermediary or provided assurances on Phoenix's behalf, that's potentially another violation. If Bonner signed with Indiana knowing she'd force her way out to join Phoenix, that's acting in bad faith and potentially fraudulent. The precedent this sets is incredibly dangerous for the WNBA's future. If teams can openly tamper with players under contract to other franchises, if players can sign deals with no intention of honoring them, if coaches can publicly brag about multi-year recruitment efforts that violate league rules, then what's the point of contracts? What's the point of the collective bargaining agreement? Why should any small market team invest in building through free agency if star players can just be poached through back channels? The league's competitive integrity depends on rules being enforced consistently and violations being punished appropriately. Indiana Fever fans have been incredibly vocal about demanding an investigation, and they're absolutely right to do so. The evidence isn't circumstantial or based on rumors. It's literally the Phoenix Mercury head coach admitting on camera to multi-year recruitment efforts and crediting another team's player with helping make it happen. That's not speculation. That's a confession. The league needs to investigate when this contact began, what was communicated, who was involved, and whether any rules were violated. If violations occurred, penalties need to be assessed. That might mean fines, loss of draft picks, or other sanctions that actually deter this behavior in the future. But here's the reality that nobody in the league office wants to acknowledge. A real investigation might expose practices that are more widespread than anyone wants to admit. If they dig into the Phoenix Bonner situation and find tampering, what else might they uncover? How many other player movements have been orchestrated through similar back channels? How many other coaches and players have been involved in unauthorized recruitment? Opening this door might reveal that tampering is so common in the WNBA that actually enforcing the rules would implicate multiple teams and dozens of people. That's probably why the league has been so reluctant to act, despite overwhelming evidence in this case. The silence from Dana Bonner herself has been absolutely telling throughout this entire saga. She hasn't addressed the accusations. She hasn't explained her side of the story. She hasn't acknowledged the damage done to Indiana or the questions about whether she acted in good faith when signing her contract. That silence speaks volumes. If this was really just about fit issues or basketball reasons, you'd expect some explanation, some attempt to control the narrative. Instead, there's been nothing, which suggests she knows how bad this looks and has been advised to keep quiet while the league hopes the controversy just fades away. Phoenix Mercury fans will defend this by saying they just signed a player who became available, and there's nothing wrong with that. And technically, once Bonner was released by Indiana, Phoenix was free to sign her. That part is legitimate, but the question isn't whether Phoenix could sign her after she became available. The question is whether Phoenix tampered with her before she became available. Whether they maintained unauthorized contact while she was under contract elsewhere, and whether they orchestrated her exit from Indiana through back channels. Nate Tibbetts' own words suggest the answer to those questions is yes, and that's where the violation occurred. The Alyssa Thomas element adds another dimension that makes this even messier. Thomas recently signed with Phoenix herself, which raises questions about whether her own move was part of this larger orchestration. Did Phoenix promise Thomas they'd bring in Bonner if she signed? Was that part of the recruiting pitch? If so, that's using one player's contract negotiation to tamper with another player under contract elsewhere, which is absolutely against league rules. The timeline of Thomas's signing, Bonner's brief Indiana stint, and Bonner's eventual arrival in Phoenix all seem suspiciously coordinated in a way that suggests planning rather than coincidence. Look, professional sports involve recruiting and player movement. That's normal and expected. But there are rules governing how and when that recruiting can happen, and those rules exist to protect competitive balance and ensure teams can operate in good faith. What appears to have happened with Dana Bonner and the Phoenix Mercury isn't normal recruiting. It's alleged tampering, possibly over multiple years, involving unauthorized contact with a player under contract to other teams, potentially using another player as an intermediary, and possibly involving a player signing a contract in bad faith with no intention of honoring it. That's not business as usual. That's a violation of everything the league's rules are designed to prevent. The Indiana Fever deserve answers? Their fans deserve answers. Every team in the WNBA that operates honestly and respects the rules deserves to know that violations will be investigated and punished. Caitlin Clark, who's been battling through injuries in early 2025 and could have used the veteran presence she was promised, deserved better than to be part of what looks like an elaborate scheme to circumvent league rules. Aliyah Boston and the rest of that young Fever roster deserve teammates who were actually committed to building something special in Indiana. Sophie Cunningham, who joined in 2025 and has been everything Bonner should have been, shows what real veteran leadership looks like. So here's what needs to happen. The WNBA needs to launch a formal investigation into the timeline of contact between Phoenix and Dana Bonner. They need to determine when recruitment began, what was communicated, and who was involved. They need to examine Alyssa Thomas's role and whether she acted as an intermediary in tampering. They need to review whether Bonner signed with Indiana in good faith, or whether she always intended to force her way out. And if violations are found, they need to impose meaningful penalties that actually deter this behavior going forward. Anything less than a thorough investigation and appropriate punishment sends the message that tampering is acceptable as long as you're willing to deal with some bad press. The evidence is already public. Nate Tibbetts provided it himself. The question now is whether the WNBA has the courage to actually enforce its own rules, even when doing so might be uncomfortable or reveal uncomfortable truths about how business is done behind the scenes. The integrity of the league depends on rules meaning something and violations having consequences. If Phoenix and Dana Bonner orchestrated this move through tampering and face no penalties, then the rules are meaningless and every team should feel free to tamper however they want, because apparently there are no real consequences. Before we wrap this up, let us know in the comments whether you think the WNBA will actually investigate this or just sweep it under the rug and hope everyone forgets. And if you want to see more content exposing what's really happening in the WNBA behind the scenes, smash that like button and subscribe, because we're not afraid to tell you the truth that mainstream media won't touch. The Dana Bonner saga is a test case for the WNBA's future. Either rules matter and violations have consequences, or they don't, and the league becomes a free-for-all where tampering is just accepted as part of the game. The evidence of what happened is public record, literally on video from the Phoenix Mercury head coach's own mouth. The question is whether anyone in the league office cares enough to do something about it. Based on the deafening silence so far, the answer appears to be no. But pressure is building, fans are demanding accountability, and eventually the league will have to decide whether protecting one team's shady dealings is worth sacrificing the competitive integrity that makes professional sports meaningful. The clock is ticking, and the whole basketball world is watching to see if the WNBA has the backbone to police itself, or if tampering is just going to be accepted as business as usual going forward. What happens next will define the league for years to come. Bye.